Girl, just get up already. That's what my husband Mason said while I lay face down on our driveway, cheek burning against hot concrete, barbecue grease soaking into my hair like some sick marinade. I couldn't feel my legs. Not numb like they fell asleep numb. Gone. Like somebody unplugged the bottom half of my body and walked off with the cord. But according to Mason, I was being dramatic. It was his 35th birthday. Of course it was. Because if your life's gonna implode, it'll do it on a day already scheduled for someone else's spotlight. My name's Daniela Cruz. I'm 32, billing coordinator for a chain of vet clinics in northern Kentucky. I spend my days arguing with pet insurance reps about why Mr. Pickles the Pomeranian absolutely did need a $900 dental cleaning. Glamorous stuff. But hey, it paid the mortgage on our modest ranch house and kept the lights on, at least, that's what I thought. 6 hours earlier, everything still looked normal. His mom, Lorraine, had turned our backyard into what I can only describe as Pinterest threw up on a football tailgate. Streamers, banners, balloons shaped like beer mugs, whole 9 yards. Mason doesn't even like parties. Dude's dream birthday is steak, TV, and nobody talking to him. But Lorraine lives for events. And questioning Lorraine's vision? Yeah, that was a rookie mistake I'd stopped making years ago. I'd been feeling off for months. First it was the tingling, like static in my toes after work. Then the fatigue. The kind where an 8-hour shift feels like you ran a marathon in Crocs. My vision started blurring sometimes, just for seconds. Once my knees buckled in the shower and I slammed into tile hard enough to bruise my shoulder. Every time I mentioned it, Mason shrugged it off. You're stressed, babe. Drink more water. You sit weird at your desk. Lorraine had her own take, young women today just don't have stamina. This from a woman who needed to sit down after carrying a grocery bag 10 feet. But sure, my collapsing legs were a character flaw. That Saturday, I was trying to push through. Smile, host, be the supportive wife. I carried this giant tray of smoked brisket from the driveway toward the backyard gate, the fancy stuff from that barbecue joint that charges like they're shaving gold onto the meat. Halfway across the concrete, my legs just quit. No stumble. No warning. They shut off. The tray hit first. Then my knees. Then my face. I remember the crack of ceramic and the smell of meat grease spreading under me. I tried to push up. Nothing. Tried to wiggle my toes. Nothing. Absolute zero below my hips. Terror doesn't even cover it. It was like my brain screamed into a void and nothing echoed back. Mason walked over from the grill, walked, not ran. Looked down at me like I'd spilled beer on his shoes. Seriously, Danny, he said. Get up. I can't feel my legs, I told him. My voice sounded far away, like someone else talking through my mouth. He sighed. Not worried, annoyed. Like I'd chosen the worst possible moment to fake a migraine. You always do this, he muttered. You gotta make everything a scene. One of his co-workers, big guy in a Bengals jersey, stepped forward like he might help. Mason waved him off without even looking. She's fine, he said. She just wants attention. And just like that, 14 people decided I wasn't worth believing. Lorraine came clacking over in heels, hands on hips, loud enough for neighbors to hear. I knew you'd pull something today, she snapped. You can't stand not being the center of attention for one day. I lay there on scorching concrete, unable to move, while the music kept playing and party chatter drifted from the yard. And that's when a weird thought hit me, one that had nothing to do with my legs. 3 weeks earlier, I'd found a credit card statement in Mason's name I'd never seen before. $8,000 on it. He said it was a bank mistake. Last month, $1,200 vanished from our savings. Car repairs, he'd said. Our car still had the same check engine light. Lying there, unable to feel half my body, something cold slid into place in my mind. Not a conclusion. Just a crack forming in the story I'd believed about my life. Mason went back to the grill. Lorraine followed. Guests resumed laughing like nothing happened. I was alone on the driveway. For about 90 seconds, I genuinely thought this was it, my whole story ending face down while people stepped around me. Then, faint but unmistakable, I heard a siren. Someone had called 911. To this day, I don't know who. But that sound cutting through the music was the first proof that maybe, just maybe, I wasn't invisible after all. And what none of them knew yet. The collapse on that driveway wasn't where my story started. It started 5 years earlier, in a break room that smelled like burnt coffee and microwave popcorn. The first time I met Mason Carter, he was standing in front of a vending machine that had eaten his dollar. He smacked the side of it with the flat of his hand, muttering, "Come on, man, don't do me dirty today." I laughed. He turned, smiled like we were already in on the same joke, and said, "If this thing steals from me one more time, I'm calling corporate." That was Mason back then, easy, warm, just self-deprecating enough to feel safe. The kind of guy people describe as solid. Reliable. One of the good ones. We met through my coworker Jenna at the vet clinic. She'd been trying to set us up for months, swearing he was perfect for me. Stable job, steady paycheck, no drama, good family. "He's not like the dudes you dated in your 20s, she kept saying. "He's grown." And honestly, he did seem grown. He worked inventory management at a regional auto supply warehouse about 20 minutes outside Covington. Not glamorous, but steady. He showed up on time. Paid his bills. Remembered birthdays. Brought donuts to work on Fridays. Everyone liked him. When we started dating, he was attentive in that low-key, comfortable way that sneaks up on you. He'd text good morning every day. Ask about my shifts and actually listen. Once, after I mentioned loving sour candy, he showed up with a whole bag of it, "Because you looked stressed yesterday." My grandma would have called him dependable. Which, in her book, outranked handsome by a mile. We got serious fast. 14 months from first date to wedding. Quick, yeah, but when you're 28 and someone makes you feel chosen, months blur into momentum. He proposed at Devou Park overlook at sunset. Nothing flashy. Just him, nervous, holding a ring box like it might explode. I said yes before he even finished the sentence. Looking back, the shift didn't happen all at once. It was slower than that. Like water damage behind a wall, everything looks fine until one day the paint bubbles and you realize the rot's been spreading for years. The biggest change was Lorraine. When Mason and I were dating, she was pleasant. A little intense, but friendly. She hugged me hard, called me sweetheart, told me how happy she was Mason had found someone so stable. I thought she meant responsible. What she meant was manageable. After we married, Lorraine's involvement went from frequent to constant. She had a key to our house. Mason said she'd always had one. Just in case, he told me. I didn't love it, but I let it go. Newlywed diplomacy. Then I'd come home from work and find her in the kitchen reorganizing cabinets because the flow wasn't logical. She critiqued my cooking. My cleaning. The way I folded towels. Apparently I'd been doing towels wrong for 30 years and nobody had informed me. Every time I bristled, Mason smoothed it over. Same script, gentle tone. "That's just how she is, babe. She means well. Don't make it a thing." So I didn't. For 4 years, I didn't make anything a thing. And that's the danger of being the peacekeeper, you shrink so gradually nobody notices you disappearing. Eventually, you stop noticing too. The money changes started about 2 years in. Mason suggested we combine accounts. "We're a team," he said. "No mine and yours." It sounded reasonable. Romantic, even. So we merged everything, paychecks, savings, bills. I made about 43 grand a year at the clinic. Not huge, but steady. And somehow, after the merge, there was always less left than there should have been. Groceries plus utilities plus mortgage didn't equal what vanished each month. I mentioned it once. He laughed lightly. "You're bad with numbers, Danny." Which was hilarious, considering I literally processed invoices for a living. I let it drop. Because I trusted him. Because marriage means trust, right? Now I know where it went. That credit card statement I'd found, the one with $8,000 on it. I wasn't supposed to see that. It covered expenses I didn't know existed yet. A whole second column in his life ledger. But back then, I still believed our story. 5 months before the driveway collapse, my body started sending signals. Month 1, tingling in my feet after work. Like static under my skin. Mason said I sat weird at my desk. Month 2, fatigue. Bone-deep exhaustion that knocked me out by 8 p.m. He said I needed vitamins. Lorraine heard and announced, "Young women today just don't have stamina." Month 3, my vision blurred mid-shift, screen going fuzzy for about 30 seconds. It scared me enough that I tried to book a doctor appointment. That's when I discovered Mason had never added me to his health insurance after switching jobs 4 months earlier. He said he'd handle it. Weeks passed. He didn't. At the time, I thought it was procrastination. Forgetfulness. Annoying, but normal. I didn't know yet that a wife without insurance is a wife without medical records. Month 4, my legs buckled in the shower. I slammed sideways into tile and caught the grab bar we'd installed for Lorraine's visits. Heart racing, adrenaline flooding. I told Mason. He shrugged. Probably conditioner on the floor. So I started keeping a flashlight by the bed in case my legs gave out at night. Which sounds paranoid, until you've nearly cracked your skull open once. Month 5, the numbness crept past my ankles. My feet felt detached, like props someone else was operating. I finally stopped waiting for Mason and booked a doctor appointment myself. Paid cash, $2.90, from a small emergency fund I'd kept secret in a credit union account since I was 19. My grandma's advice, every woman needs money no one else can touch. Best advice she ever gave me. The doctor ordered blood work. Results weren't back yet when I hit the driveway. There was one more thing from those months I didn't understand then. My nightly tea. I'd always had chamomile before bed. Nothing fancy. About 5 months earlier, it started tasting slightly off. Not spoiled, just bitter at the edges. I mentioned it once. Mason said he'd switched brands because the old one got expensive. Made sense. I shrugged it off. Because here's the part that seemed sweet at the time, Mason made that tea for me every single night. Never missed. The same man who forgot anniversaries and milk somehow never forgot my bedtime cup. I thought it meant he cared. I didn't know yet that routine can hide anything, if someone is patient enough. About 3 months before the collapse, Mason started telling people I'd become obsessed with being sick. He used careful words: anxious, fragile, overwhelmed. Concerned husband vocabulary. He told friends. His mom. Even my sister, Marisol. He did it so convincingly that Marisol called me one night and gently asked if I was okay, mentally. My own sister. That's the thing about gaslighting, it doesn't just bend the victim's reality. It rewrites everyone else's too. By the time I collapsed on that driveway, Mason had already built the narrative. All I did was fall into it. The ambulance pulled up at 4:47 p.m. I know the exact time because from where I lay on the driveway, cheek pressed to concrete, I could see the oversized backyard clock Lorraine had gifted Mason 2 Father's Days ago, despite the fact he had 0 children. It hung crooked on the fence, forever 5 minutes fast. Even so, I watched the second hand tick while my legs remained utterly absent. When the siren cut, the party music kept playing. Classic rock drifting over lawn chatter like nothing had happened. Somewhere, someone laughed. Then the ambulance doors opened. She stepped out first, mid-40s maybe, compact build, shoulders that said she'd hauled more stretchers than she could count. Short brown hair tucked behind one ear, expression calm in that practiced way of someone who walks into chaos for a living. Her name tag read, T. Easton. She didn't rush. She assessed. I watched her eyes move across the scene, the broken platter, grease stain, me sprawled motionless, guests hovering but distant, Mason standing with arms crossed. In about 2 seconds, she understood more than anyone else there had in 10 minutes. She knelt beside me, already pulling on gloves. "Hi," she said, voice steady, direct. "I'm Tanya. Can you tell me your name?" "Danny," I whispered. My mouth felt dry. "I can't feel my legs." "Okay," she said, like that information was serious but not surprising. "We're gonna check some things." She ran a metal tip lightly along my calves. "Tell me when you feel this." I waited. Nothing. She pressed harder. Still nothing. Her face stayed neutral, but her eyes sharpened. She tapped my knee with a reflex hammer. "Nothing." "Any sensation at all below your hips?" she asked. "No." "Since when?" Five months, getting worse," I said. Words felt heavy, like I had to push them uphill. She nodded once and started writing. Not quick checkbox scribbles, longer notes. Detailed. I remember noticing because even in panic, some part of my brain clocked it, she's taking this seriously. "Any medical conditions?" "No." "Medications?" "No." "Insurance?" I swallowed. "Not right now." Her pen paused for a fraction of a second. Then continued. "Any changes in diet, routine, supplements?" she asked. I hesitated, then said, "My tea tastes different. Past few months. My husband switched brands. He makes it every night." That's when something subtle happened. Her pen slowed on the word tea. Not dramatic. Not obvious. But deliberate. She underlined something once. Mason stepped closer, hovering. "She's been like this for months," he said loudly, to Tanya, not me. "Probably stress. She gets anxious." He was performing. Concerned spouse mode. I could hear the script in his tone, the same one he'd used on Friends. Tanya didn't look at him. "Sir, I need a little space to assess her." He didn't move. "This is my driveway," he said. "She's my wife." Now Tanya did look at him. Just a steady, unblinking 2-second stare that said, "I've dealt with louder men than you." "I understand," she said calmly. "I still need you to step back." There was no argument in her voice. No edge. Just authority. Mason's jaw tightened. But he stepped away. Here's what I didn't realize then. Tanya wasn't just annoyed. She was cataloging. Behavior. Tone. Body language. Inconsistencies. Because worried husbands hover, pace, ask questions, hold hands. They don't stand with arms crossed delivering rehearsed explanations. Tanya reached for her radio. "Dispatch, Unit 12. Requesting PD assist. Family member interfering with patient care." Her tone stayed matter-of-fact. Standard procedure words. Mason heard PD and stiffened. "Police? For what?" "Just routine," Tanya said evenly. "Please remain back." He backed off further, irritated but not alarmed. He thought it was about proximity. It wasn't only that. They slid a board under me, lifted me onto the stretcher. My body felt like cargo, upper half alive, lower half non-existent. The sky above blurred past as they rolled me toward the ambulance. I expected Mason to climb in after me. He didn't. "I'll follow," he said. "Gotta deal with guests." Guests. The doors shut. Siren rose again. And just like that, the driveway, the party, Mason, Lorraine, all of it, fell away behind me. Inside the ambulance, everything was white light and antiseptic smell. Tanya clipped monitors to my finger, wrapped a cuff around my arm. Vitals steady. Legs still gone. She glanced at me, then said something quietly, like she was placing a fact on the table. "You're not crazy." That was it. No elaboration. No drama. But those 3 words cracked something open inside me. Because for months, everyone, Mason, Lorraine, even my sister, had gently implied this was in my head. Stress. Anxiety. Overreaction. And here was a stranger who'd known me 7 minutes saying the opposite. I felt tears slide into my hairline. At the ER, things blurred into fluorescent corridors and quick hands. Tanya gave her handoff to the doctor, young guy, exhausted eyes. But I noticed something. He listened harder than usual. Leaned in. Asked follow-ups. Because Tanya didn't just report symptoms. She reported context. Progressive neuropathy. Timeline change. Spouse minimizing. Behavioral inconsistency. She recommended expanded tox screening. I didn't know what that meant yet. 3 hours later, Mason finally showed up. He walked into my ER room, glanced at the monitors like they were background decor, and said, "So when do they think you'll be discharged?" "The house is wrecked from the party and Mom's upset." "Not are you okay?" "Not what did they find?" "The house." "Lorraine." "The mess." He sat in the corner chair and scrolled his phone for 20 minutes while I lay there unable to feel my own legs. I remember thinking, with a strange detached clarity, this is the man I married. And maybe, just maybe, the paramedic was right. Maybe I wasn't crazy after all. Around 9 p.m., a nurse came into my ER room with that quiet, efficient energy nurses seem born with. She checked my glanced at the monitors, then pulled the curtain a little more closed, even though I was already alone. She sat on the edge of the bed. "Daniela," she said gently, "I need to ask you something we ask all patients." I nodded. My throat felt tight, like I already knew. "Do you feel safe at home?" There it was. The universal question. The one they're required to ask. Routine. Standard. Nothing special. Except she didn't rush it. She didn't glance at her chart. She looked directly at me and waited. And I did what almost everyone does. "Yeah," I said automatically. Because abuse doesn't always look like fear. Sometimes it looks like confusion. Like erosion. Like being slowly convinced your reality is wrong until you don't trust your own instincts anymore. She held my gaze another second, like she knew the reflex answer when she heard it. Then she nodded and left. But the question stayed. "Do you feel safe at home?" I lay there staring at the ceiling tiles, that sentence circling like a moth around a bulb. Because physically, Mason had never hit me. Never shoved me. Never raised a fist. He didn't scream much either, mostly sighed, dismissed, minimized. So was I unsafe? I didn't have language yet for what was happening. But my body, half numb, half terrified, felt like it knew something my brain hadn't caught up to. I had nothing to do but think. And scroll. So I opened our joint bank account app. The missing $1,200 was still labeled car repair. But now, in the sterile quiet of a hospital room, I noticed something new. Small ATM withdrawals scattered through the last 4 months. $60. $80. $60 again. All from the same location, Florence, Kentucky. I frowned. We didn't live in Florence. Didn't shop there. Didn't have friends there. Nothing in our life touched Florence. But the withdrawals were regular. Predictable. Like a subscription. My chest tightened. At 6 a.m., the door opened. A doctor walked in, the same ER physician from earlier, but this time he wasn't alone. Behind him stood 2 women. One in scrubs who introduced herself as a patient advocate. The other in a dark blazer with a badge clipped at her belt. The doctor didn't stand. He pulled a chair up beside my bed and sat. That's when I knew. Doctors don't sit for good news. He spoke gently, carefully, like someone explaining something fragile. Your MRI shows damage to your peripheral nerves, he said. Specifically demyelination, the protective coating around the nerves is deteriorating. My brain snagged on the word deteriorating. Conditions like multiple sclerosis don't match the pattern, he continued. Autoimmune causes don't either. I swallowed. Then, what does? He paused. Brief. Measured. The pattern is consistent with chemical exposure, he said. The room went very still. The patient advocate shifted slightly beside him. The woman with the badge watched me, expression steady. Your toxicology screen detected methylene chloride in your blood, the doctor said. I blinked. The term meant nothing. It's an industrial solvent, he explained. Paint stripper. Degreaser. Exposure over time can cause progressive nerve damage. Over time. Months. My stomach dropped. He went on, voice quiet but precise. The levels indicate repeated ingestion in small doses over an extended period. Ingestion. Swallowed. Fed. My mind stalled. Like a computer freezing mid-command. Someone had been giving it to me. 4 months. I didn't cry. Didn't scream. Didn't even move. I just stared at him while the words rearranged my entire world in real time. The woman with the badge stepped forward slightly. I'm Detective Alvarez, she said. Kenton County PD. Her voice was calm, practiced, the tone of someone who's delivered terrible clarity before. I'm going to ask you some questions, she said. Okay? I nodded. Numb in places that had nothing to do with nerves. When did the tea taste change, she asked. 5 months, I whispered. Who prepared it? Mason. How often? Every night. She wrote something down. Underlined twice. What does your husband do for work? Inventory manager, auto supply warehouse. Another underline. Any recent financial changes? Insurance policies? Arguments? I shook my head automatically, then stopped. Insurance. I don't know, I said. He handles most paperwork. Her expression didn't change, but something in her eyes sharpened. We'll verify, she said. The doctor added quietly, we've contacted law enforcement because the findings strongly suggest deliberate poisoning. Deliberate. Poisoning. My husband. The words existed in the same sentence now. Reality didn't wait for consent. Detective Alvarez continued methodically. T. Finances. Lorraine. My symptoms. Mason's behavior. Then she asked, has your husband ever taken out life insurance on you? I don't think so, I said. But even as I spoke, that credit card statement flashed in my mind. $8,000. Florence withdrawals. And suddenly, the crack in my life story split wide open. Because if someone had been feeding me poison every night, there was only one person who could have done it. By the time Detective Alvarez left my hospital room that morning, my entire reality had tilted about 30 degrees off axis. I lay there staring at the ceiling tiles, for humming softly beside me, and replayed the same sentence over and over. Repeated ingestion over months. Poison doesn't accidentally end up in herbal tea every night. Which meant someone had put it there. Which meant someone had handed it to me. Which meant. I stopped the thought right there, because finishing it felt like stepping off a cliff. Late that afternoon, Alvarez came back. This time she didn't sit. She stood near the bed, posture crisp, the air around her carrying that subtle shift people in authority have when events are already moving. We executed a search warrant at your residence, she said. My throat went dry. Okay. We also searched your husband's workspace in the garage. A cold ripple slid through me. Behind shelving, she continued, we located a partially used container of industrial-grade methylene chloride. My ears rang. The doctor's words from earlier, industrial solvent, clicked into place like tumblers in a lock. Alvarez watched my face carefully. Not unkind. Just observant. We also contacted your husband's employer, she said. They confirmed he's been signing out this compound regularly for approximately 6 months. 6 months. My symptoms, 5. My stomach twisted. Sign-out quantities exceeded normal inventory management requirements, she added. Supervisors did not question it due to his tenure and reliability. Reliability. That word again. The same one Jenna had used when she set us up. I swallowed hard. So, he had access. Yes. The room felt smaller. Financial analysis is ongoing, Alvarez continued. But we've already identified a credit card in your husband's name with approximately $8,000 in charges. My heart lurched. I saw that. Her eyes flicked up. When? 3 weeks ago. He said bank error. She nodded once, like confirming a puzzle piece. Charges include monthly premiums for a $350,000 life insurance policy on you, she said. The words didn't land at first. They hovered, abstract. Then they dropped. On me? I whispered. Yes. My lungs forgot how to expand. The policy was opened 7 months ago, she said. Simplified issue. No medical exam required. 7 months. Before my symptoms. Before the tea taste change. Before everything. My signature? I croaked. Forged, she said calmly. Handwriting analysis is underway, but preliminary review indicates non-match. My hand started shaking. The patient advocate beside me reached gently for my wrist. Breathe, she murmured. But air felt thick, like trying to inhale syrup. Alvarez went on, voice steady. The same credit card also shows recurring rent payments on a studio apartment in Florence, Kentucky. Florence. The ATM withdrawals. Oh my God, I whispered. Lease signed 5 months ago, she said. Your husband is sole occupant. 5 months. Exactly when the numbness reached my ankles. My vision tunneled. He wasn't just, I couldn't finish. Planning to collect insurance, Alvarez said quietly. Evidence suggests preparation for relocation post-mortem. Post-mortem. After I died. The words were clinical. Detached. But they detonated inside me. My husband had been poisoning me slowly, while setting up a new apartment, funded by a life insurance policy forged in my name. My brain tried to overlay that reality onto the man who made my tea and asked how my day was. They didn't align. Which made it worse. Alvarez hesitated a fraction. Then added, there's additional information regarding your mother-in-law. I closed my eyes. Text messages recovered from your husband's phone show ongoing communication, she said. Content indicates she was aware of your health concerns and the tea preparation. Aware. Lorraine knew. She referenced your medical appointment scheduling, Alvarez continued. And advised caution prior to a social event. The party. Lorraine, she better not pull anything Saturday. My stomach heaved. She monitored your suspicions and relayed them, Alvarez said. This constitutes potential accessory involvement. I turned my face into the pillow and finally broke. Not loud sobbing. Just silent shaking, tears soaking hospital linen. Because Mason. I could almost categorize. Greed. Cowardice. Calculation. But Lorraine? A 63-year-old woman who'd hugged me at holidays. Critiqued my casseroles. stood over me on that driveway accusing me of faking, while knowing exactly why I couldn't move. She'd watched me deteriorate for months, and worried only that I might see a doctor before the job was finished. That realization hurt more than the poison. Alvarez waited until my breathing steadied. "We're building the case on evidence," she said. "Not assumptions. But current findings strongly indicate conspiracy to commit homicide." Homicide. My life had just been categorized as a murder attempt. Before she left, she paused at the door. "There is one more matter," she said. I looked up, exhausted. "Your husband's father," she said. "Deceased 2011. Cause listed as progressive neurological failure of undetermined origin." My skin prickled. "Medical records show 6-month deterioration," she said. "Symptoms consistent with yours." My heart thudded slow and heavy. "Your mother-in-law was the primary caregiver," Alvarez said. "We are reviewing the historical case file." The room went ice cold. Because suddenly the poisoning wasn't just Mason's idea. It looked inherited. It was 5:52 a.m. when they went to my house. I wasn't there to see it. I was still in a hospital bed with electrodes stuck to my chest and half my body relearning sensation. But later, Detective Alvarez walked me through every minute, and the scene replayed in my mind so vividly it felt like I'd watched it through a window. 3 unmarked police cars rolled onto our street just before sunrise. The kind of quiet hour where even the birds are undecided about morning. Frost still on the lawns. Porch lights glowing dull amber. My porch light among them. The same porch where I'd watered plants and waved at neighbors and believed my marriage was ordinary. Alvarez rang the bell. Inside, Mason shuffled down the hall half asleep, wearing gym shorts and that faded chili cook-off t-shirt he loved. The door opened. He saw the badge. And his face did something that stuck with Alvarez enough she told me about it twice. Not shock. Recognition. The look of a man who'd been waiting for a knock he hoped would never come. "Mr. Carter," she said. He nodded once. "You're under arrest for attempted murder by poisoning, insurance fraud, and forgery." Silence. No denial. No outrage. No confusion. Just a long exhale. Alvarez said suspects fall into 2 categories: the innocent ones protest, and the guilty ones calculate. Mason calculated. He didn't ask why. He didn't say it was a mistake. He said 4 words: "I want a lawyer." They cuffed him on the porch where Lorraine's begonias hung. Neighbors' curtains twitched. The cold metal closed around wrists that had once held mine while we crossed streets. They walked him to the car. He didn't look back at the house. 12 minutes later, at 6:04 a.m., another team knocked on Lorraine's door 8 minutes away. She opened in a bathrobe, hair in rollers. When she saw badges, she tried to shut the door. An officer's foot stopped it. "Lorraine Carter," they said, "you're under arrest as an accessory to attempted murder." Unlike her son, Lorraine exploded. "This is absurd," she shouted. "My son would never, she's lying, she's unstable." Even then, she blamed me. Her neighbor, Mrs. Pelham, the one with the tiny white terrier, was outside walking at dawn like always. She saw the whole thing. Later she told police Lorraine kept yelling, "I did nothing wrong," while they cuffed her beside her azalea bushes. Respectable suburbia. Handcuffs at sunrise. No TV cameras. No dramatic music. Just the quiet permanence of consequence. Both were transported separately. Neither allowed contact. And here's where their perfect partnership cracked. They initially hired the same attorney. But within a week, he dropped them both. Conflict of interest. Because their defenses couldn't coexist. Mason's version: "My mother pressured me." Lorraine's version: "I had no idea." Both can't be true. So they each scrambled for new counsel, cheaper, because assets were frozen. Mason was denied bail. Forgery, poison acquisition, secret apartment, insurance motive. It all screamed premeditation and flight risk. He went to county detention in orange scrubs instead of his chilly t-shirt. Lorraine's bail was set at $500,000. She couldn't post it. So she sat in a holding facility 12 minutes from her son, both of them finally separated after a lifetime of alliance. But the deeper shock came when Alvarez visited me again with a thin manila folder. "Historical file review," she said, setting it on my tray table. Inside, records from 2011. Name, Robert Carter. Age, 49. Cause of death, progressive neurological deterioration, undetermined origin. Duration, approximately 6 months. Symptoms listed: tingling extremities, fatigue, motor weakness, organ involvement. My symptoms. Same timeline. Same household. Primary caregiver, Lorraine Carter. I stared at the page until the letters blurred. No toxicology was performed, Alvarez said. At the time, no suspicion existed. Spouse occupation, school cafeteria supervisor. Ordinary woman. Invisible threat. The district attorney has authorized reinvestigation, she said. Including potential exhumation pending toxicology review. I looked up slowly. "You think she did it before," I said. Alvarez chose her words carefully. "The pattern warrants examination." But we both knew what that meant. If Lorraine poisoned her first husband, then Mason hadn't invented this. He'd learned it. The tea. The microdosing. The patience. The gaslighting. This wasn't a husband's crime his mother helped with. It was a mother's method her son executed. A family recipe. And suddenly the driveway scene, the accusation, the certainty in her voice, the total lack of alarm, made horrifying sense. She hadn't just known why I couldn't move. She'd seen it before. Once the poisoning stopped, my body started fighting back. The neurologist explained it in a tone that balanced realism and hope, the kind doctors use when outcomes live in gray zones. "Peripheral nerves can regenerate," she said. "But slowly. About an inch per month." An inch. I pictured a ruler against my leg. Hip to knee. Knee to ankle. An entire map of damage measured in inches and time. "Some deficits may be permanent," she added gently. "But you've already regained partial sensation in the upper thighs. That's encouraging." Encouraging. I clung to that word like a rope. The first 2 weeks were the hardest, not physically, emotionally. Because lying in a hospital bed relearning sensation gives you nothing but time to process the fact that your husband tried to kill you with bedtime tea. There's no script for that realization. No Hallmark card that says sorry your spouse attempted homicide. Though honestly, there probably should be. Sensation returned in strange, uneven waves. First warmth. Then prickling, like thousands of ants waking under my skin. Then deep ache, as if nerves were stretching after hibernation. Pain, the neurologist said, was good. Pain meant connection. After 3 weeks, physical therapy moved from bed exercises to standing attempts. The first time they raised the parallel bars, my stomach flipped. My legs looked like mine, but they didn't feel owned yet, more like borrowed equipment. "Weight through your feet," the therapist said. "Will support." I gripped the bars. Shifted forward. My knees trembled violently. For a second nothing happened. Then, pressure. Faint, unstable, but real. "I'm up," I whispered. "You're up," she confirmed. For seconds later I sat back down, exhausted. But something seismic had happened. I had stood. Word spread fast through my tiny circle. My sister Marisol showed up that evening with takeout and mascara tracks down her cheeks. "I'm sorry," she said for maybe the 50th time. I believed him. I squeezed her hand. He believed himself too. And that was the truth that kept surfacing. Mason hadn't just deceived others. He'd built a reality where he was reasonable, patient, justified. A man driven by circumstances, not choice. That narrative had trapped all of us. My next standing attempt lasted 10 seconds. Then 20. Then a shaky pivot. 3 weeks and 4 days after the driveway collapse, the therapist said, "Let's try steps." The hallway outside my room stretched long and polished, handrails gleaming under fluorescent lights. Marisol stood on my left, therapist on my right, gait belts snug at my waist. "Shift weight," she coached. Left foot lifted, barely cleared floor, set down. Right foot followed. 1 step. The world narrowed to balance and breath. 2. My legs shook like live wires. 3. Marisol was crying again. 4. I stopped, chest heaving, vision bright with effort. "You did it," the therapist said softly. 4 steps. It doesn't sound like much unless the last time you were upright you were collapsing onto concrete while your husband rolled his eyes. 4 steps felt like crossing an ocean. Progress accelerated after that. 5 steps. 10. Length of the corridor. Walker to cane. Cane to cautious independence. My left leg stayed weaker. Feet retained numb patches. But they worked. They held me. And no one stood over me saying stop faking. Meanwhile, the legal world moved faster than my nerves. Mason faced charges: attempted murder, assault with a toxic agent, insurance fraud, forgery. Potential sentence: 15 to 25 years. His employer terminated him immediately and handed investigators full solvent access logs. Corporations cooperate quickly when their liability radar pings homicide. His new defense attorney attempted plea negotiations. The prosecutor declined. Premeditation plus poisoning equals 0 sympathy. Lorraine's situation worsened. Accessory charges held, and the reopened investigation into Robert Carter's death gained traction. A forensic toxicologist reviewing 2011 records flagged symptom congruence with solvent exposure. Exhumation authorization loomed. Lorraine refused cooperation. Insisted ignorance. Text messages disagreed. Meanwhile, the life insurance policy on me was voided. Forgery alone constituted felony fraud. Financial forensics froze all marital assets pending victim protection orders. Which meant everything Mason thought he'd inherit shifted legally to me. The house equity. Savings. Joint accounts. Total recovery, about $187,000. Not wealth, but survival capital. I decided quickly, I wouldn't return to that house. No amount of bleach removes memory from concrete. 2 months after discharge, I sold it. Closed accounts. Severed utilities. Every signature felt like reclaiming territory. I found a small apartment in Newport, 12 minutes from Marisol. 1 bedroom. Sunlit window. Kitchen just big enough to make tea for one. My tea. Prepared by me. Sometimes I still skip it. Just because I can. I went back to work at the clinic. Same invoices, same pet claims, same fluorescent hum, but everything felt recalibrated. Survival alters scale. Annoyances shrink. Boundaries sharpen. And one evening, while reviewing charts, I met an orange one-eyed rescue cat scheduled for adoption clearance. He climbed straight into my lap and stayed. I named him Verdict. Because sometimes justice isn't a courtroom. Sometimes it's simply being alive when someone planned otherwise. The first time I saw Mason after the arrest, he was wearing orange. County detention orange, creased, stiff, anonymous. It swallowed the man I used to know. No chilly cook-off t-shirt. No casual confidence. Just an inmate number printed over his chest where my head used to rest when we watched TV. It was the arraignment. I almost didn't go. My attorney said I didn't have to, the state represented me as the victim. But something in me needed to see him in the same reality I now lived in. No narratives. No minimization. Just facts. So I went. Marisol held my elbow as we entered the courthouse. My gait was still uneven, left foot lagging slightly. The hallway smelled like old paper and floor wax. Fluorescent lights hummed overhead. Inside the courtroom, everything felt too small for what had happened. Wood benches. State seal. Judge adjusting glasses. And Mason at the defense table. He didn't turn immediately when I entered. His lawyer leaned toward him, whispering. Then Mason glanced up, and froze. Our eyes met. For a second, time collapsed. I saw flashes layered over each other, Mason handing me tea, Mason at the grill, Mason in cuffs. He looked thinner. Eyes shadowed. But the strangest part? He looked irritated. Not ashamed. Not broken. Annoyed. Like I'd complicated his schedule. I realized then something crucial: the story in his head hadn't changed. I was still the problem. Charges were read formally: attempted murder by poisoning, assault with a hazardous substance, insurance fraud, forgery. He pled not guilty. Of course he did. The prosecutor outlined evidence: solvent acquisition records, toxicology, forged documents, financial motive, communication with Lorraine. Each point landed with the steady rhythm of inevitability. Mason's lawyer requested bail reconsideration. Denied. Flight risk plus lethal premeditation equals incarceration. Mason showed no visible reaction. Just a tight jaw and eyes fixed ahead. When they let him out, he didn't look at me again. Lorraine's arraignment happened the next day. I didn't attend. But Alvarez later described it: Lorraine in jail uniform, hair flattened, still insisting confusion. Still claiming maternal concern. Still painting me unstable. Some people never revise themselves, even under indictment. The investigation into Robert Carter deepened simultaneously. The forensic toxicologist reviewing his 2011 medical file issued a preliminary opinion: symptom progression consistent with chronic solvent exposure. Probability elevated given occupational access in household. Which meant Lorraine's past wasn't quiet anymore. The district attorney filed for exhumation. I read the notice sitting at my new kitchen table, verdict purring against my thigh. The paper shook in my hands. Because if they confirmed poisoning, then Mason hadn't just learned violence. He'd inherited it. The legal system moved with grinding precision after that. Motions. Evidence filings. Expert reports. My attorney handled most interactions, shielding me from procedural noise. But one moment cut through everything. A victim impact consultation. The prosecutor needed my statement for trial prep. So I sat in a conference room under humming lights and answered questions about fear, damage, trust. How has this affected you? She asked. I paused. Because how do you compress attempted spousal homicide into language? My sense of reality, I said finally. He lived beside me while planning my death. That changes how you understand people. She nodded slowly. Anything else? I looked at my hands. Nerve tremor still faint in the left fingers. He made me doubt my own body, I said. Even as it failed. That's the part that lingers. Gaslighting leaves deeper scars than poison. Afterward, I walked out into winter sunlight and realized something strange. I didn't feel rage. Not the cinematic kind. No desire for revenge. Just clarity. Mason and Lorraine were now fixed points, danger defined, contained. The real work was rebuilding myself. Therapy helped. Trauma-focused sessions untangled months of manipulation. We mapped red flags backward: minimization, financial control, medical obstruction, narrative shaping. Seeing the pattern stripped it of mystique. He hadn't been subtle genius. Just methodical. The divorce finalized 3 months later. Emergency dissolution under felony harm statutes transferred all marital assets to me. Mason forfeited claim rights automatically upon conviction risk. Signing the final decree felt less like ending a marriage and more like closing a case file. Name restored. Accounts severed. Legal identity reclaimed. I walked out of the courthouse that day under clear blue sky, Marisol beside me, cane tapping pavement in steady rhythm. "You okay?" she asked. I considered. "My life exploded," I said. "But I'm still here." Verdict greeted us at home, one-eyed gaze bright, tail high. I scooped him up and felt something settle inside me, not closure, not peace exactly, but solidity. Mason had tried to erase me. Instead, he'd exposed himself. And in that exposure, I had space to exist fully again. The trial date was set for early fall. Until then, the ghost of what almost happened lingered, but no longer owned me. By the time spring slid into early summer, I could walk without the cane most days. Not perfectly, my left foot still dragged when I got tired, and patches of numbness lingered along the outer calves, but I moved. Independently. Reliably. My neurologist called it functional recovery with residual deficit, which sounded clinical and detached. I called it walking away. Physical therapy tapered from 3 sessions a week to 1. The exercises shifted from survival mechanics to strength, stairs, balance boards, uneven surfaces. Relearning terrain my body used to navigate automatically. It's strange, realizing how much the brain delegates without permission. Standing. Stepping. Trusting ground. After poisoning, nothing feels default anymore. Every movement is negotiated. But healing isn't only nerves. It's memory. And my body remembered things my mind tried to file away. The first time I brewed chamomile again, months after discharge, the smell alone made my stomach flip. My hands froze mid-pour. For a split second I saw Mason's fingers around the mug, steam rising between us. I dumped it out. Later in therapy, I described that reaction. Trauma encodes sensory anchors, my therapist said. Smell, taste, routine. Your nervous system flags them as threat. So tea is ruined forever? I asked. She shook her head. No. But you reclaim it intentionally. New context. New control. So I tried again. Different mug. Different brand. My kitchen. Verdict weaving around my ankles. I boiled water, steeped leaves, watched the color bloom amber. No one else touched it. I drank. The taste was gentle, floral, entirely ordinary. My chest tightened anyway. But I finished the cup. That was the thing about recovery, you repeat small acts until fear loses authority. The trial loomed in the background like weather, scheduled for October. Prosecutors updated me periodically. Forensic toxicology finalized solvent ingestion correlation, financial tracing complete, Lorraine's texts authenticated. And Robert Carter's exhumation proceeded. I wasn't told details immediately, legal sensitivity, but weeks later Alvarez confirmed preliminary findings. Preserved tissue indicated chemical exposure consistent with methylene chloride metabolites. Not definitive homicide yet. But close. Lorraine's past was no longer hypothetical. One evening after that update, I sat on my balcony watching traffic lights change along the riverfront and realized something unsettling. I didn't feel triumph. Only sorrow. Because whatever Lorraine had been decades ago, she'd transformed into someone who normalized slow killing. And Mason, raised inside that logic, had inherited it without friction. Understanding doesn't excuse. But it explains. An explanation dissolves some hatred. Work resumed rhythm. Vet clinic invoices. Pet owners arguing deductibles. Ordinary frustrations. I leaned into the mundane like a life raft. Normalcy is underrated until it's threatened. Colleagues knew fragments of my story, serious medical incident, legal case pending. I didn't elaborate. Trauma isn't workplace small talk. But one afternoon, while reviewing dental claims, Jenna, the coworker who'd introduced Mason and me, approached hesitantly. "Can we talk?" she asked. We stepped into the break room, the same one where I'd first met him. Burnt coffee smell unchanged. Vending machine still crooked. "I'm sorry," she said immediately. "I keep thinking." I vouched for him. "You didn't poison me," I said gently. "I said he was safe," she whispered. I met her eyes. He looked safe. That's the part people struggle with, predators rarely advertise. They curate. Jenna nodded, tears bright. "If you ever need anything." "I needed someone back then," I said softly. "Now I need forward." She squeezed my shoulder. Conversation done. No blame carried. Later that night, I wrote in the journal my therapist suggested, tracking recovery markers beyond physical. "I walked the full grocery store today. I made tea without shaking. I laughed at a stupid cat video." Small entries. Huge territory reclaimed. Because attempted murder fractures identity. You become victim in documents, reports, court filings. Necessary label, but incomplete. I refuse to live inside it permanently. I was Daniela. Sister. Worker. Survivor. Cat owner. Person who likes sour candy and sunset views and quiet mornings. Mason's narrative had tried to shrink me into problem. Recovery expanded me back. By late summer, I could jog short distances. Not gracefully, but functionally. Muscles rebuilding over damaged wiring. Each stride a defiance. And sometimes, in motion, I felt something unexpected. Gratitude. Not for what happened, but for surviving it. Because survival sharpens perception. I notice things now, how sunlight moved across walls, how safe silence felt, how trust must be earned not assumed. The body remembers poison. But it also remembers healing. By the time October arrived, I'd rehearsed the story of my own attempted murder so many times it felt like borrowed language. Clinical. Structured. Evidence ready. The prosecutors called it victim impact alignment. My therapist called it narrative control. I called it emotional whiplash. Because memory, when spoken in court, stops being memory. It becomes artifact. And artifacts don't tremble. I did. The courthouse downtown rose in pale stone blocks, columns stern against a gray sky. Verdict insisted on coming, yowling at the apartment door when I dressed, but I left him with Lily and took a cab alone. This was a place no living thing who loved me needed to witness. Security scanners. Hard benches. Fluorescent lighting that erased warmth. The air smelled faintly of paper and cold coffee, the institutional perfume of systems processing human failure. Alvarez met me near the witness waiting room. Suit immaculate, expression softened just enough to read human. "You ready?" she asked. No one ever is. But readiness isn't required. Only presence. "Yes," I said. Inside, time moved differently. Legal time, stretched by procedure, punctuated by objection. I wasn't called immediately. First came toxicologists. Then forensic analysts. Then financial investigators outlining transfers from Mason's accounts to Lorraine's. The narrative assembled piece by piece. Poison. Motive. Pattern. When my name was finally called, Daniela Reyes, it echoed across wood paneling like a gavel strike. I stood. Walked. Each step measured, not by weakness now, but by attention. Everyone watched the survivor. Jurors leaned slightly forward. Strangers studying damage in human form. I took the oath. Saturday. Adjusted microphone. The prosecutor began gently. Background. Relationship timeline. Medical collapse. Hospitalization. Facts I'd repeated dozens of times. But truth spoken publicly lands heavier. Did the defendant prepare beverages for you during your relationship? She asked. Yes. How frequently? Several times a week. Did you suspect those beverages contained harmful substances? No. Simple answers. Clean lines. Then came the hospital phase. Do you recall the onset of symptoms? Yes. I described it: numbness, confusion, motor loss. The terror of not understanding why my body stopped obeying. ICU lights. Ventilation support. Doctors speaking around me as if distance softened reality. Jurors' faces tightened. One woman pressed fingers to her lips. And during this hospitalization, the prosecutor said carefully, "Did the defendant visit?" Yes. What did he do during those visits? The courtroom felt suddenly smaller. He brought tea, I said. A murmur rippled, quickly hushed. And did you consume it? Yes. Do you now understand those beverages contained methylene chloride? Yes. Saying the chemical aloud felt surreal. Industrial solvent translated into attempted murder. The prosecutor paused. Ms. Reyes, can you describe the lasting effects you've experienced? This was the moment rehearsed most. I spoke of neuropathy, rehabilitation, lingering sensory deficits, fear of ingesting anything prepared by others, nightmares, loss of autonomy, betrayal trauma. But then she asked something unscripted. How has this affected your sense of trust? Silence pooled. Because trust isn't medical data. It fractured it, I said slowly. Not just in him. In my own judgment. I trusted someone who was harming me. That realization rewrites how you see every past decision. My voice didn't break. But it lowered. I had to relearn that being deceived doesn't make you defective. It makes you human. The prosecutor nodded, letting the words settle. No further questions. Then defense cross-examination. Strategy predictable, introduce doubt. Suggest alternative causes. Reframe intention. Ms. Reyes, the defense attorney began, tone polite steel, you cannot personally verify what substances were in any beverage, correct? I relied on forensic analysis, I said. So your belief that my client poisoned you is based on expert opinion, not direct observation? Yes. And you continued accepting drinks from him even after becoming ill? I did not know he was causing the illness. Yet you now attribute malicious intent? Yes. He pivoted. Is it possible the defendant was unaware of any contamination? No. How can you be certain? Because ignorance doesn't repeat patterns. But courtroom answers require precision. Because solvent metabolites were detected repeatedly over time, I said. And because he prepared every beverage I consumed outside medical supervision. He paused, recalculating. No further questions. I stepped down, legs steady but hollowed. Testimony extracts something intangible, like donating blood you didn't know you'd lose. In the hallway, I leaned against cool marble and exhaled. Alvarez joined me. You did well. I almost laughed. As if attempted murder had performance metrics. Is it weird, I asked quietly, that I feel like I just narrated someone else's life? No, she said. Trauma distances. Court formalizes that distance. I nodded. Because the woman on the stand, calm, factual, composed, was both me and not me. Survival creates versions. And testimony locks one into record. The verdict took less than a day. I'd been warned not to read into timing, juries move unpredictably, prosecutors said, but everyone knew swift deliberation often meant consensus had formed early. Still, waiting stretched like wire. I sat in the same hard wooden pew as before, palms pressed flat against my thighs, grounding through touch the way my therapist taught. Feel texture. Temperature. Weight. Anchor to present. Across the aisle, Mason sat beside his attorney. He'd lost weight since arrest. cheekbones sharper, suit looser at the shoulders. But the essential architecture of him remained, the composed stillness, the watchful eyes that used to feel attentive and now read predatory. He didn't look at me. That, more than anything, clarified reality. Not remorse. Not denial. Erasure. Because to him, I was no longer Daniela. I was evidence. The bailiff called us to rise. Jurors filed in, faces set in the peculiar neutrality of people who've carried others' pain and now must translate it into legal consequence. The foreperson stood. On the charge of attempted murder in the first degree, we find the defendant. A breath held across the room. Guilty. The word landed with physical force. Not loud, but final. Something inside my ribcage shifted. Not relief exactly. More like structural realignment. A beam-long crack finally settling into place. Mason didn't react outwardly. No flinch. No exhale. Only a blink, slow and reptilian. Lorraine did. From the gallery, she released a thin sound, half gasp, half protest, before deputies silenced her. She stared at Mason as if the verdict were betrayal rather than consequence. He never turned. Sentencing would follow later. Appeals inevitable. Legal process never truly ends. But guilt established the axis. Truth had been recognized. Afterward, outside the courtroom, autumn air cut sharp and clean. Reporters clustered at steps, cameras lifting as we emerged. Alvarez had warned me, high-profile poisoning cases draw attention. Ms. Reyes. How do you feel about the verdict? Microphones angled like spears. I hadn't planned to speak. But silence, I realized, would let others narrate for me again. So I stopped. Flashbulbs snapped. The city hummed behind the crowd. My pulse thudded, not fear now, but magnitude. I feel heard, I said. The word surprised even me. A reporter leaned in. Do you have a message for survivors of similar crimes? Survivors. Plural. The realization rippled, this wasn't only my story anymore. Public record transforms private suffering into reference point. Yes, I said slowly. If someone harms you in ways you can't immediately prove, that doesn't make the harm less real. Bodies tell truth even when people lie. Keep seeking answers. Another question, do you forgive the defendant? Ah. The cultural obsession. I met the reporter's gaze. Forgiveness isn't owed. Accountability is. Cameras clicked faster. Alvarez touched my elbow, time to move. Statements complete. We stepped into waiting car silence, door shutting out the media roar. My hands trembled faintly, adrenaline leaking off. You shifted the narrative, Alvarez said. From spectacle to survivor. I looked out the window at passing storefronts, people living unpoisoned afternoons. I just said what felt true. That's rare, she replied. Back home, Lily opened the door before I knocked, arms already out. I folded into the hug, forehead against her shoulder, and this time I did feel it, relief, deep and seismic. He's guilty, I murmured. I know, she whispered. I watched the live update. Verdict wound around our ankles, meowing indignantly at being excluded from proceedings. I scooped him up, burying my face in his fur. Animal warmth, uncomplicated trust. The opposite of Mason. Later that night, alone on the balcony, city lights scattering across the river, I replayed the courtroom moment. Guilty. Such a small word for attempted annihilation. Justice, I realized, doesn't sound triumphant. No orchestral swell. No cinematic closure. It sounds procedural. Measured. Almost quiet. Because justice isn't emotion. It's recognition. The law acknowledging, this harm occurred, this person caused it, this survivor mattered enough to defend. And that recognition reshapes identity again. Not victim. Not just survivor. Witness. Someone whose truth entered record and altered outcome. The body remembers poison. But now the world remembered too. Sentencing came in December, under a sky the color of unpolished steel. By then, the media cycle had moved on, another scandal, another crime, another public spectacle devouring attention. That's the thing about surviving something catastrophic, the world eventually returns to normal speed, while your life keeps echoing. The courthouse felt quieter this time. No reporters clustered outside. No microphones. Just procedural gravity. Mason entered in county uniform instead of tailored suits. The visual shift, fabric, posture, restraint cuffs, made the verdict real in a new way. Guilt had translated into consequence. He still didn't look at me. Lorraine sat behind him, smaller somehow, age suddenly visible in the collapse of her shoulders. Months of investigation had culminated in formal charges for Robert Carter's death, second-degree murder pending trial. Her myth of invisibility had shattered. 2 poisoners. 1 lineage. I took my seat beside Alvarez, hands steady in my lap. I'd written my victim impact statement weeks earlier, drafted, revised, honed until every sentence felt exact. Words matter in rooms where harm is weighed. When my name was called, I approached the podium without the tremor that had once lived in my legs. Rehabilitation had restored more than gait, it rebuilt ownership of space. The judge nodded. Ms. Reyes, you may proceed. Paper rustled softly as I unfolded the statement. My name is Daniela Reyes, I began, voice even. And I am here because the man seated before this court attempted to end my life over many months by poisoning me. No ornamentation. Just fact. I will not recount the medical details. They are documented. Instead, I want to describe the after. I paused, letting the word settle. The after is learning that trust can be weaponized. That intimacy can be used as delivery system for harm. That love, when counterfeit, becomes exposure. The courtroom held stillness like glass. I lost months of mobility. I lost certainty in my own perceptions. I lost the assumption that shared meals are safe. Recovery required relearning basic human reliance. My eyes moved briefly toward Mason, not seeking, just acknowledging existence. You chose a method that depended on my faith in you. That is the deepest injury. Not the chemical. The betrayal. A breath in. But I did not lose everything. I retained relationships that proved real. I retained the capacity to rebuild. And I retained the right to stand here and name what was done. I lifted the final page. Your actions reshaped my life. They did not erase it. I am not defined by your crime. I am defined by surviving it. Silence followed, thick, absorbing. I folded the paper, stepped back. The judge thanked me. Procedure resumed, statutes cited, aggravating factors reviewed, premeditation, duration, abuse of trust, attempted concealment. The language of law dissecting morality into criteria. Then sentence pronounced. 30 years. The number hung in air, heavy, mathematical, irreversible. Mason showed no visible reaction. Lorraine emitted a sharp intake, quickly stifled. I felt, again, not triumph. Completion. Because sentencing isn't revenge. It's boundary. Society drawing a line and saying, this far, no further. Outside, winter sunlight flashed brittle across courthouse steps. No cameras waited. Just ordinary pedestrians, traffic, distant sirens, the world uninterested in one case's conclusion. That anonymity felt strangely comforting. Alvarez exhaled beside me. You changed outcomes beyond this sentence, she said. Lorraine's charges gained traction because you survived long enough to expose pattern. The statement settled deep. Survival as evidence chain. I didn't intend that, I said. Impact rarely asks permission, she replied. At home, Lily had hung paper snowflakes across the balcony railing, her way of marking season despite everything. Verdict chased them, batting at dangling threads, blissfully unaware of human justice systems. I watched him, smile tugging unexpectedly. Life continues in small domestic absurdities. That evening, I brewed tea. Same mug. Same leaves. Steam curling upward in soft spirals. I carried it to the balcony, city lights winking on below, and drank without hesitation. The taste was just tea now. No courtroom. No hospital. No Mason. Recovery, I realized, isn't a finish line. It's a widening radius, the space in which memory exists without controlling the present. The long after isn't empty. It's reclaimed terrain. Winter settled fully after sentencing, the kind that sharpens air until every inhale feels newly minted. The city shifted into holiday cadence, lights strung across storefronts, strangers carrying wrapped parcels, the soft collective insistence on warmth against dark. For the first time in over a year, my life contained no looming court dates. No depositions. No testimony prep. No legal briefings dissecting my own near death as evidence. The silence that followed felt unfamiliar. Not peace exactly, more like open water after surviving a storm. The absence of waves can be disorienting when you've learned to balance against them. Therapy continued, those sessions thinned. My therapist called this phase integration, where trauma ceases to dominate identity and instead becomes one thread among many. You're not moving on, she clarified once. You're moving with. I understood the distinction. Because attempted murder doesn't evaporate. It calcifies into biography. But biography doesn't have to be prison. One afternoon in January, Alvarez emailed, Lorraine Carter's trial scheduled for late spring. Prosecution confident. Exhumation toxicology finalized, methylene chloride exposure consistent with prolonged ingestion. History closing a loop. I read the message twice, then closed the laptop. Lorraine's fate no longer governed mine. That realization landed quietly but decisively. Her story had intersected my life, it didn't define its trajectory. I marked the email unread and went for a walk instead. The riverfront path lay half-frozen, sunlight fracturing across ice sheets. My gait, once tentative, now held rhythm. Muscles trusted again. Nerves, though imperfect, carried command reliably. Each step proof of something simple and radical. I remained. At a bench overlooking water, I sat and opened the journal I'd kept since rehabilitation. Pages thick with entries: first cane-free day, first unassisted stairs, first full grocery trip, first nightmare-free week. Markers of return. I flipped to a blank page. For a long time, nothing came. Not because there was nothing to say, but because the story no longer needed constant documentation. Finally, I wrote. Today I walked without thinking about walking. Then below it. Today I existed without thinking about survival. 2 sentences. Immense territory. Later that month, the clinic hosted a small winter gathering, staff, spouses, potluck tables crowded with casseroles and store-bought cookies. Jenna approached me cautiously, still carrying residual guilt she'd never deserved. "You look lighter," she said. I considered the word. It fit. "Less haunted," I replied. She smiled, relief softening her face. "I'm really glad." So was I. Because trauma can fossilize perception, everything refracted through harm. But time, attention, and deliberate healing polished those fossils into memory instead of present threat. That night, Lily and I strung new lights along the balcony, replacing the ones that had burned out during my hospitalization months ago. A small domestic act, but symbolic, restoration of space once associated with illness and fear. "Hard year," she said quietly, nodding wire. "Hard," I agreed. "But not only." She glanced at me. "What do you mean?" I watched the river, dark ribbon reflecting city gold. "It showed me who stays," I said. "And that I can rebuild." She nodded. No platitudes. Just shared understanding forged through proximity to catastrophe. Inside, verdict sprawled belly up on the rug, absolute trust incarnate. I lay beside him, hand in his fur, and felt something settle, deep, foundational. Safety, not as assumption, but as reclaimed state. The body remembers poison. But it also remembers survival pathways. Neural rewiring. Strength returning over damaged circuits. Fear extinguishing through repetition of safe outcomes. What remains after attempted annihilation isn't emptiness. It's clarified existence. I am still Daniela. Not the woman before Mason. Not only the woman he tried to erase, but the one who lived after. And that version contains both histories, harm and endurance, without being reduced to either. Winter would pass. Seasons would turn. Lorraine's trial would come and go. Life, indifferent to individual suffering, would continue its steady forward push. And I would continue inside it. Unpoisoned now. Spring returned the way it always does, quietly at first. A softening in the air. Buds along branches you hadn't realized were bare. The river shedding ice in slow, patient fractures. Life resuming without announcement. By the time Lorraine Carter's trial began, I was no longer tethered to courtrooms. The prosecutor had warned I might be called, pattern testimony, but in the end, the forensic record stood solid without me. Robert Carter's preserved tissue, financial records, decades-old witness statements. A history finally audible. I followed updates only peripherally. Not avoidance, distance. There's a difference. Some chapters belong to others to close. The verdict came on a Tuesday afternoon, guilty of second-degree murder. I read the headline once, felt a muted settling in my chest, and closed the browser. 2 generations of poison resolved in law. But the story I carried had already moved beyond theirs. That evening, I walked the river path where months earlier I'd written today I existed without thinking about survival. The entry had aged well. Survival was no longer foreground. It had become infrastructure, present, foundational, unnoticed. My stride was steady, almost thoughtless. The body, once battlefield, now simply body again. At a bend overlooking water, I paused. The current moved fast with snowmelt, sunlight skimming its surface in shifting shards. Movement layered over memory, ICU monitors, courtroom wood, therapy mats, balcony lights, verdicts fur beneath my fingers. All of it mine. All of it contained. I realized then something subtle but profound. Mason no longer occupied internal space. Not suppressed, absent. Like a removed splinter whose wound has closed. Scar, yes. Pain, no. That's the quiet miracle of healing. Not forgetting. Not forgiving. Just ceasing to orbit the harm. Behind me, footsteps approached, Lily catching up, slightly breathless, scarf trailing. You went ahead, she said. I needed a minute, I replied. She followed my gaze to the river. Feels different lately, she said. You. I considered. The change wasn't dramatic enough for easy description. No epiphany. No cinematic release. Just accumulated days of not being afraid. I think, I said slowly, I stopped waiting for life to restart. She smiled, soft, knowing. It already did. We stood there a while, wind tugging hair loose, water speaking in its constant language. No urgency. No ghosts. Later, back at the apartment, I brewed tea. The ritual had become ordinary again, kettle hiss, leaves unfurling, steam rising. I carried the mug to the balcony where new spring lights now replaced winters. The city glowed in warmer tones. Windows open. Voices drifting upward from sidewalks. I drank. Chamomile tasted like itself, floral, mild, entirely benign. No echo of hospital rooms. No shadow of betrayal. Just tea. Verdict wound between my ankles, tail high, demanding attention with indignant chirps. I lifted him, his weight familiar against my chest, heartbeat steady beneath fur. Living creature. Living moment. I'm here, I murmured into his warmth. And I was. Fully. Attempted murder had tried to reduce me to absence. To erase agency, mobility, future. But existence, stubborn and cellular, persisted. Cells repaired. Synapses rerouted. Muscles relearned. Trust regrows selectively, intelligently. I stepped to the balcony rail, looking out across the river where spring carried fragments of winter downstream. There's a phrase therapists use, post-traumatic growth. It sounds clinical, almost sterile. But what it really means is this: after someone tries to end your story, and fails, you become its author with ferocious clarity. I did not choose what was done to me. But I chose what remained. And what remained was life, expanded, aware, unpoisoned. I set the empty mug down, inhaled night air, and felt something simple and complete settle into place. I am still standing.